We are going to be in a very obscure passage when we're talking about a Mother's Day sermon. It's going to be in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. We're going to go through verses 1 through 12. How many of you, by an upraised hand, would say that you were raised by a loving mother? And I want you, before you raise your hand, I want you to notice, if your mom's in the service, you just better raise it regardless, okay? So how many of us were raised by a loving mother? Oh, almost all of us in the room. There's a couple of you already sleeping, but how about this one? How many of you were raised by a godly mother? Raise your hand. Cindy, when you watch this later, they did raise their hand, so you can, they believed you to be a godly mother, so just so you know. Most of us in here, if not all of us. Now you think about the percentages about that. How much of an influence you all have on your children and your grandchildren to follow after the Lord, when practically every single one of us raised our hands. That's a big responsibility. The goal here in this morning's sermon is not to discount the influence of fathers, as you will see. The goal is not also to make our mothers out to be perfect, more than human. They're all human. We all are. But this morning I want to reflect on how and why our mothers raised us as they did. I hope that God brings to your memory instances of when your mothers raised you and why and how they raised you as they did. Here in this passage, Paul is talking to the church at Thessalonica, one that he loves, one that he birthed himself. And he's encouraging them, reminding them of how he started the church. So let's get started. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1. And actually, we're going to read all 12 verses, and then we'll come back and talk about them. For you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you was not in vain. But even after we had suffered before we were spitefully treated at Philippi, remember they were thrown in prison, beaten, and then the jail broke apart. But as you know, we were bold in our God to speak to you the gospel of the God in much conflict. For our exhortation did not come from error or uncleanness, nor was it in deceit. But as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, even so we speak, not pleasing to men, but God who tests our hearts. For neither at any time did we use flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak of covetousness, as God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, when we might have made demands as the apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children, so affectionately longing for you. We were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us. For you remember, brethren, our labor and toil, for laboring night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. We preach to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we have behaved ourselves among you who believe. As you know now how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you, as the Father does his own children, that you would walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Back in verse 1, Paul says, for you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you is not in vain. We have all testified this morning that the impact that our mothers made on us and all of the blood, sweat, and tears was worth every drop. Our mothers made great sacrifices for us growing up. Often they were the last to eat. They were the last one to get new clothes or new shoes. They cared more about how you looked than how they looked. She always wanted a better life for her kids than she did have her of her own. She made great sacrifices as Paul did for the church here at Thessalonica. In verses 3 through 5, he says, "For our exhortation, our encouraging words, our preaching did not come from error or uncleanness, nor was it in deceit. But as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, even so we speak, not pleasing men, but God who tests our hearts. We didn't use flattery words, nor did we cloak it in covetousness. God is our witness." Paul and his apostles shared the word of God the best they knew how. They shared the greatest truth with this church in Thessalonica. As your mother raised you, she taught you all she could teach you. In fact, my mother was a teacher, much to the bane of her existence. As a matter of fact, in kindergarten, she homeschooled me. Thank you. I appreciate it, Clarence. Thank you so much. Can't do it without an ale 8. The nectar of the gods. Excuse me, I shouldn't even have said that from the pulpit. That was really bad. My mother taught me the best she knew how to do. She taught me everything that she did know. And my mom was a smart woman. She was a teacher herself. She taught me about human nature, not just facts and figures. She taught me about loving people, even when it was difficult. Amen. She never told me or taught me anything that she herself hadn't gone through first or would go through. Everything she taught me, she had walked that road. And sometimes that road was very difficult. In verse 6, he said, "Nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, when we might have had demands as the apostles of Christ." They didn't teach us. They didn't raise us to get notoriety. And even when they could have, they didn't put themselves out there as first. What'd they do? Look at my kids. When they had the opportunity of giving praise to themselves, they didn't. They sunk in the background and promoted their children. Everything that she did was for our gain. She didn't love me or raise me so that others would look at her, but that they would look at me. My mother showed me how much she loved me by selflessly serving us kids so that we could be fat and happy. And if you look at me, she at least accomplished one of those two. Our mothers worked selflessly, not for their gain, but for ours. Verses 7 and 8. "But we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children. So affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but our very own lives, because you became dear to us." We always went to Mom when we were hurting, didn't we? She always had the perfect touch. She could always put the Band-Aid on in the right way. Her kisses healed all wounds. We always ate, and we always ate first. For me, my mom went to work full-time as a teacher so that I could go to Mount Carmel, where I felt God was calling me to during high school. The word cherishing here is pretty neat. It literally means to warm with tender care. Now, is that not a picture of our mothers? That when we're down or we're hurting, we're struggling, Mom comes over and wraps her arms around us and just warms us with her tender care. There's nothing like a mother's hug. Verse 9, "For you remember, brethren, our labor and our toil, for our laboring night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. We preach the gospel of God. There was no one that worked harder inside the home. Sure, dads worked outside the home to provide for the family. But once she got home, that was her domain, wasn't it? The cooking, the cleaning, the mending, all of it was on her. She wanted it to be perfect. Even the gardening for my mom, which I hated. But she did that too. It was hard work, but she never complained about it. She just did it out of love for each of us. And yes, even in this passage, she preached to us. Sometimes she even preached at us. And I got that on several occasions. She wanted to raise us the right way so that we could be godly children and later on godly adults. And she worked tirelessly that we might achieve that goal. My mom, personally, she fit all kinds of roles. She was a Sunday school teacher. She was the children's church teacher. She was the VBS director. It wasn't just that she was doing it for me or my 4 brothers and sisters. She did it for everybody around her. I remember on several occasions, something she said that stuck out to me boldly. There's been a few times, even as an adult, when I was terribly in the wrong. And she had the exact words to preach to me the good news. And she delivered it in a way that's never left me. How about your mom? Verse 10. You are witnesses, and God also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we behaved ourselves among you and who believe. I saw how others treated my mother, and I also saw how she responded to it out of love. I saw how she dealt with broken hearts, including her own. She was strong and enduring. She was loving and forgiving to everyone. And when I personally broke her heart more than probably anyone else in the world could, she still forgave me. Amen. And she still does. My mother's prayers literally have changed my life. And that's not hyperbole. It's the truth. Abraham Lincoln said, I remember my mother's prayers, and they have always followed me. They have clung to me all my life. Our mothers didn't live perfect lives, but they lived genuine, holy ones. And they did their best, and they saw to it to be their best, that we could see the genuine truth of the gospel. We saw it too, didn't we? We saw it lived out in their lives. Verse 11. As you know how we exhorted, comforted, and charged every one of you as a father does his own children. Our mothers encouraged us when we were down to believe in ourselves, to be able to win, to accomplish, and to grow. Moms comforted us when we were hurt. I remember one time I was playing with rocks. I was actually trying to find gold. I was busting up field rocks, okay? I wasn't bright. And somehow in the process of doing that, I got my finger between a rock and a hard place. I busted that. I mean, it was bad. It was really bad. And Mom was not home. So I went home to Dad to receive the comfort that I so needed. It didn't turn out like I expected it to. Well, go put a Band-Aid on it. I don't even know if he looked at it, much less put a Band-Aid on it. We always went to Mom for our comfort. She gave us a standard to live by and expected us to live up to that standard. She set the bar high, often much higher for us than for other people, because she knew that we could reach it. The word here for charge, I couldn't believe this. The word for charge in the Greek is not one that you'd expect. The word is martyreo. Does that sound like a word that we know? Our moms gave us a charge that we would be a martyr for our character. That's literally the word. The charge is to be a martyr, a witness for our character. My mother raised me in such a way that I would live out my life to my beliefs, even if it killed me. And I hope one of these days it does. Just plain and simple. I hope to die with my boots on. My mom set a standard for me to live by and a character to live out even if my life depended on it. And she's going to watch this, so thank you, Becky Miller. Thank you all, moms. George Washington said, "My mother was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. All that I owe, all I am, I owe to my mother. I attribute all my success in life to be more intellectual and more physical education I received from her." Me too, Mr. President, me too. In the ancient times, the ruby was one of the rarest and most valuable of all the precious stones. Solomon imported rubies into his kingdom along with massive amounts of gold, silver, and other precious stones. But in his writing of the Proverbs, he said he used the ruby as a standard for things that were priceless. And there's 3 things in all of the Proverbs that he said were priceless as rubies. First of all was Proverbs chapter 8, verse 11. And he said, to have wisdom is far richer than having rubies. The next one he said was in Proverbs 20, verse 15. And he said to be able to speak wisely was better than to have rubies. And then the final one was in Proverbs chapter 31, verse 10. A virtuous or a godly woman, some translations say, and a capable wife is worth more than rubies. We are here today because of our priceless godly mothers. Why did they endure so much for us? Well, sure, it was out of a heart of love, I know. But what were they looking for as an end result for all of their toil? Well, Paul tells us in verse 12 that you would walk worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Our mothers did all that they could that we could walk worthy of their sacrifice. That we would be godly, strong, world-changing people because they believed that we could. They sacrificed so that our lives might be better than theirs, so that we might live up to the potential that they saw in all of us. So how do you walk worthy in this world in which we live? How do you make their sacrifice worth it? How can we live up to such a high standard? Well, in chapter 1, he asks somewhat the same question. How do we make sure that what they endured wouldn't be for nothing, wouldn't be in vain? Wouldn't it be a shame to take all that our mothers gave us and then let it die with us? They invested in us, they worked with us, they did all that they could so that we would be better, and then we do nothing with it. What a shame that would be. We walk worthy by doing what they did for those that God has given to us. Amen. We take what was invested into us and we invest it into others just as it was given to us. Whether it be our children, our husband, our wives, our neighbors, our church folks. We invest it as it was invested into us. Don't let their struggle end with us. This isn't just for the mothers either. This was Paul writing to the church. It was because of his investment into this church that 2,000 years later, we have the gospel. What would have happened if it would have died with them? Amen. Now, what's funny is the Thessalonican church, they were the ones that had the most persecution. It did actually die with them. But as they died with a martyr, the charge that they had, they lived out their character, even though it cost them their life. And because they lived it that strong, we have the gospel today. So let's walk worthy by doing what they did for others. And I just put it in a bullet point so you could see it. Let's make great sacrifices for others. Don't let our mother's efforts be wasted. It's our turn now. Share the truth that we have been given. We've been entrusted with a great truth. We know how to use it because we've seen it in their lives. So let's share it. Selflessly give for other people that are around us, for their good. We were impacted by our mother's selflessness. May our selflessness impact others as God gives us. Be gentle, providing, and cherish those that God has given you. Give warm, tender care to all of those that God has placed in your hands. Amen. Work hard for others and preach to them, not at them. Amen. Live holy and transparent lives. Be encouraging, comforting, and set a standard for them to live up to, even if it costs them their life. Our end goal should be that the next generation would also walk worthy of the calling of God. Praise God. In conclusion, would you all consider $10 million to be a lot of money? Yes. What would you be willing to do for $10 million? Please don't answer anything sinful, all right? There'd probably be a lot of things we'd be willing to do for $10 million. I want you to imagine with me. Someone wants to give you $10 million, but there's one stipulation. The stipulation is that your living mother, they would kill. They come up to you and say, I will give you $10 million if you let me kill your mother tonight. Would we take an offer like that? Please don't any of you say yes. Especially if your mother's in the room. No, that'd be crazy. Amen. We would not take $10 million for our mother's life. You know what that says? Your mother is priceless to you. Amen. Shouldn't we treat her that way? Come on, man. Shouldn't we ought to show her that? None of us know please don't make me think that this is not to be insensitive. None of us know how many more times we have with our mother. I see my mom 3 times a year, give or take. You start adding up the years, that's not many left. And I guarantee you, any of us in here, whether we have our mothers or not, would long for just one more chance to give them a hug. Shouldn't we ought to show her how much we love her if she's priceless to us? And shouldn't we also ought to show others what she taught us so that it doesn't die with us? Amen. Would you stand with me? Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.